Ray Dalio is the founder of the world's largest hedge fund, Bridgewater Associates. The firm employs a unique management process, and as you may have heard, Ray is out with a new book about it. Ray, welcome.
Thank you.
So, talk about your management practices. Do they really make a difference, and how do you know they make a difference? How do you measure that?
Well, I'll take the first question first. In order to be successful in the markets, you have to have independent thinking because the consensus is built into the price. So I've got to have a bunch of independent thinkers, right? And we better get at what's true. So that idea of radical truthfulness and radical transparencies and having procedures to get by them, being idea meritocratic, is fantastic. Let me just explain how it works, right? Only three things you need to do to have an idea meritocracy. First, you have to have everybody put on the table their honest thoughts. It's not easy to do, but in our culture, that's an important thing. Second, you need to have thoughtful disagreement. You have to know how you can bang it around and get at better answers than any individual has. And then third, you have to have ways of getting past that, protocols, then that are idea meritocratic ways. So the answer to the question is we wouldn't be half as successful, or we wouldn't maybe even be successful at all, because nobody in their mind has all the right answers. I mean, the markets teach you humility. So you need idea meritocratic decision making to get the best ideas to raise your probabilities of being right. At least that's what's worked for us.
But at the end of the day, though, Ray, I mean, aren't you looking for the best people and you promote them, and the worst people, they get shown the door? And isn't that just the same as any other company?
No. I mean, how do you know who the best people are? So there's the selection. And then second, how are those people going to deal with each other? Okay, so let's say you get the best people and you're still going to have to deal with how they're dealing with each other. Can they deal in an idea meritocratic way? How do you get to the best answer? Same question. Or like, think about it. Are you going to have autocratic decision making, like the boss knows the right answer and he's going to tell you? Or are you going to have democratic decision making, which is one man, one vote? This whole idea of believability decision making is important. And then in addition to that, what was key is write down the principles. Okay, write down the principles and then convert those to algorithms. Like, this has been a big deal for us. Look, the same things happen over and over again, every time, right? So what's decision making? What am I going to do if I'm in that set of circumstances? Okay, you got to write it down. There's a power to writing it down. If you write it down, then you can agree on what the best ones are, and then you can convert those to algorithms. We convert those to algorithms, and they become the decision rules that think better than us. So it's been fantastic.
But this process is somewhat controversial, Ray, and is it worth it? I mean, you've opened yourself up to criticism. People have written negative things about this process. Is it really worth it?
Yeah, it's not for everybody, okay? It's not the real question is, can you get past your egos and your blind spots? Can you, in an idea meritocratic way, find out what your weaknesses and your strengths are? I mean, that's the defining difference, right? Is it worth it? I look back on 42 years of doing this, and I'm at this stage of my life. I've had not just the success of the business, but I've had the best possible relationships, right? Let me give you one sentence that characterizes what we're doing. That's why explaining it in the book is important. We have an idea meritocracy in which the goals are two, to have meaningful work and meaningful relationships, or to be great at work and to have great relationships, because they support each other. It's tough love. You can have tough love. So have an idea meritocracy with the goals being meaningful work and meaningful relationships through radical truthfulness and radical transparency. In other words, put what you think on the table and let everybody see, and have that meritocracy. It attracts people because it makes everybody a part of that decision. In other words, if I'm not going to be able to tell you what I think, and you're not going to be able to tell you what you think, and we're not going to be able to work that through, what kind of relationship are we going to have? Just the boss telling everybody? You can't make people part of the organization. They can't be essentially owners in the outcome if they don't feel like they can make sense of things and be part of that. So that's been the magic. I know I can't describe it briefly to you here, but that's why I tried to explain it. So I think the real question for organizations, other organizations, and this is not by any means a investment business thing. This is far broader than investment business thing. Would you like to have an idea meritocracy? Would you like to have the best ideas win out? If you want to do that, and that is your goal, then the question is only how. And that's why I try to explain it clearly in the book.
All right, shifting gears a little bit. As a student of management practices, how do you assess Donald Trump as a manager?
I'm not going to make an assessment of Donald Trump as a manager. I don't see him up close. I don't know what he's like. I haven't had that type of interaction. Can't comment. Not knowledgeable enough. I would say what's important here is the processes that I'm describing, which is to say what's important is, first of all, to make his principles clear, and then to walk the talk, and then to have thoughtful disagreement, to know that what is in his head may be right or may be wrong, and to be able to gather others around him and to have that thoughtful disagreement so that he can get at the best answer. And ideally, also, know for the country, as a leader of the country, what are the principles that bind us together, and how can we get past our disagreements so that we together are rowing in the right direction to be making the best possible decisions. Those are important things for any leader. I don't know. I'm not in the middle of the conversations with the people around him. I don't know how that works. But I would say that that would be the best advice I can give, and those would be, the relevant thoughts.
And that would apply to the White House, is what you're saying.
It applies
to any entity.
Right. It applies to any relationship.
Yeah.
If you get past the notion that you might not have the right answer in your head, and your goal is only to have the right answer, that's the key. You only have to do two things in order to be successful. You have to know what the right decisions to make are, and you have to have the courage to make them. And when you're making, to know what the right decisions are, you got to know that they're not necessarily the ones that you're stuck in your head with your opinions, right?
Right.
So you've got to go beyond your opinions. So I think it's one of the greatest tragedies of mankind, that individuals hold on to their opinions and don't put them out and stress test them. So put them out there, stress test them, and get them from others so that you can raise your probabilities of being right. That's how we've raised our probabilities of being right.
I mean, the book is really wide-ranging. You talk about science, finance, psychology. What's your favorite discipline? What's your favorite part of the book?
I don't know. I got interested in neuroscience because of how brains are working. I got interested in history because everything repeats over time. Let's say one of the greatest reasons that people are surprised, and I've been surprised, is because things that never happened in our lifetime but happened repeatedly surprise us. So I've gotten interested in history. I can't say the parts of the book. I'd say the most valuable part of the book is this section about radical open-mindedness and how to do that well.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a kind of personal question here.
Okay.
And that is, do you believe in God? Are you an atheist, agnostic, and what is the driving principle in your life?
So I think it depends on what God is, right? I don't know if God is the forces of nature and so on. I definitely believe in those forces of nature and so on. If it is man and some reincarnation and no one, I would say I would probably doubt that. But that's a bigger question that I know. I believe in these forces of nature and evolution, and I think that that's like the most beautiful thing you read in the book. I think that nature is such a great teacher for me because it shows how reality works. And so when I look at it, man is only one of 10 million species, right? Man is 200,000 years old. Earth is 3.9 billion years old. Every species evolves or breaks into another species. So seeing these things and realizing that I'm part of that and that everything works like a machine, reality works like a machine, and just embracing it and learning how to deal with it in a realistic way has been thrilling to me as well as helpful.
All right, let's talk about something somewhat related, artificial intelligence.
Yeah?
You wrote, I suspect that AI will lead to incredibly fast and remarkable advances, but I also fear it could lead to our demise. In our lifetime? Can you elaborate?
The beautiful thing about it that we've enjoyed is the capacity of the computer to do things much better than we can, right? So the thinking. The way we do it is we specify our criteria, we test those criteria, we see how they would have worked over a period of time, and so on. The real question is how you come up with the algorithm. Is that algorithm just by testing the past? And most importantly, do you understand the logic behind that algorithm? Is there deep understanding as well as the algorithm? Or do you believe the algorithm? And if you have deep understanding, or if the future is going to be the same as the past, I think it's really great. But if the future is different from the past, and you don't have the deep understanding to know the difference, that your decision is going to make sense, I think that's very dangerous. I think in a competitive environment, there's going to be a lot of desire to throw a lot of information into computers and derive algorithms that are not understood and may not work well, will not work well, if the future is different from the past. So I think it's a tremendous asset, but it also could be a threat to our existence.
Yeah, I'm inferring that the future is not necessarily going to be the same as the past.
Right. Well, in some ways, some things it is, and some things it isn't.
Yes, because you said history repeats, right?
Yeah. If I'm doing something where the sample, playing chess, let's say, if I take enough data and put it into the computer and it comes up with the algorithms, because I know that that data set is large enough and has enough observations, I could be comfortable with that. If I'm having a doctor do surgeries, let's say, and I have a bunch of doctors do surgeries, those same movements and everything can be mimicked, essentially. That could be converted to data. And you can have robots essentially do those surgeries and be comfortable that the robots will do the surgeries even if you may not understand the algorithm, because that surgery, that mix of conditions is going to remain largely the same. However, when something is different in the future, that it hasn't been a case that has happened in the future, and particularly, I've seen it in markets. We've used algorithms for almost our entire existence, and I've seen most firms that have used algorithms of what's called artificial intelligence blow up, because the future is not the same as the past. So I'm personally, I need to have deep understanding. I mean, my own approach to this is that if I can't describe why it makes sense, and write down these principles, and you look at them and say, okay, that makes sense, it's very difficult for me to have faith, because I have a big fear of that being wrong. I'm not saying it's a problem in those things that could be mimicked like that, so I'll believe the chess game. But the way I like to play the game is I like to have the computer chess game, my version of it, operate together with me, okay? That's how it works. The systems make decisions that are our criteria, and then I'm making the decisions next to it, so I'm still thinking. And then when they're at odds, at the reconciliation, I found that to be very effective. I do believe it'll be very effective. I think that we're entering a world where that's what you're going to experience. That you're going to go to principles when you encounter them, and you're going to say, I have another one of those situations, and what should I do? And increasingly, you will have assistance that is very similar to a GPS, that will be giving you instructions, and you could think it simultaneously, and that's what the world will be like, I think.
Right. In writing about why you wrote the book, you addressed those inside Bridgewater with, I have done my best to bring you to this point. Now is the time for you to step up and for me to fade away. How serious are you on this fade away part, and what does the future hold in store for you?
Well, first of all, I love the game, and I'll always play the game of the markets as long as I'm welcome to. But I'm at a stage in my life that the greatest thing is to have not anybody need me, right? I think there are 3 stages in life. There's how I approach it. First stage in life, you're dependent on others and you're learning. Second stage in life, you're working and others are dependent on you and you want to be successful. As you go into the third stage in life, where you want others to be successful without you, that's the stage. That's where I am. That's what 2017 represents to me. That's why I wrote that book. That book is to pass along to people those essentially recipes for handling different situations that I could pass along to be of help for others. Because my greatest enjoyment and satisfaction is to watch other people be successful. If you have kids that are a certain age, let's say, I don't know, 35 or whatever, what do you want? You want them to be strong without you. That's what I want.
Shifting gears again, Ray, it's Fed Day, and I wanted to ask you about that. Do you agree with the policies that Janet Yellen has pursued?
By and large, I agree, and in the following sense. They set out a path for tightening interest rates, to raising interest rates and a rate of tightening. And every track that they set out, they didn't adhere to. In other words, they tightened monetary policy much more tightened monetary policy much more slowly than they projected and also the market projected. And that was appropriate, okay? I think that they're questioning their own decisions appropriately. I think that they're making the mistake of thinking that the unemployment rate linkage and inflation linkage is as tight as they believe. And I think that that they need to continue to have a bias toward an easing and not tighten until we get closer to seeing the whites of the eyes of inflation. And that's because of a few reasons. First of all, we don't have an inflation or too hot growth problem, so that's clear. And the breakdown between the link of employment and inflation is connected largely with what we're redefining the workforce as. The workforce, it consists of technology or robot equivalent that are competing with people. So we don't have that same sort of need to tighten monetary policy. Secondly, we have asymmetric risks. We know that tightening will work. If you have a downturn in the economy, and a downturn, most importantly a downturn, and you're starting where you are with almost zero interest rates, and you have to go back to quantitative easing. The tools don't work as effectively. Quantitative easing doesn't work, and there's not much interest rates. So there's an asymmetric risk. In addition, there's a big social risk, because when we think about the economy, it's really that we have two economies. Let's call it two economies. An average doesn't anymore represent it. The top 1/10 of 1% of the population today has a net worth that is equal to the bottom 90% combined. So if you carve out an economy, and we've done the exercise of literally saying, what does the economy for the bottom 60% of the population look like? It's a bad economy. And that bad economy, it hasn't had growth. It has rising death rates from opiates and from suicides and so on. It has a major problem. That has a major problem. And that's causing what I think is our most important economic, social, political issue of our time, which is that dilemma, that clash, those gaps between those people. Imagine if you were to have a downturn now. Okay, what would it be like socially? What will it be like economically? So if you take into consider all of those reasons, I can't see any reason for tightening. I think the issue about how fast the balance sheet rolls off is an important issue. There may not be a rise in rates much or at all, but there's the rolling off of the balance sheet. And those are significant numbers. I don't believe that the Fed is going to be able to have those numbers any more than they would be able to tighten with their interest rates the way they did. So I think a good job. But cautiousness. Also in the markets, that term structure of interest rates is built into all asset classes. If you tighten faster than is discounted in the markets, that's dangerous for the markets too. So we have all those issues. I think they're doing a good job in being cautious.
All right, a lot to chew on there, Ray. Ray Dalio, founder of Bridgewater Associates, thanks so much for coming by.
Thank you for having me.
10 years ago, Wall Street and Main Street were devastated by the 2008 financial crisis. Now, while many struggled, a few investors saw the crisis coming and were able to successfully navigate it. Ray Dalio, the founder of Bridgewater Associates, the world's largest and most successful hedge fund, was one of them. Now, inevitably, there will be another crisis, and Ray Dalio is now sharing the same principles that helped him back in 2008 in a new, and get this, a free book called A Template for Understanding Big Debt Crises. Ray joins us now. Ray, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so Ray, our audience will obviously want to know, how were you able to foresee the last financial crisis? What signs were you seeing that everyone else was missing?
Well, the way I look at it is it's like a disease. It's like a process that happens over and over again. And so I laid them out in 6 steps and then described them in 60 pages, really, the sequence of how to look at each of those phases. So that basically, you know, there's a, I don't know if you want to get into the 6 phases.
Oh, we'll get into it in just a bit.
Okay. But there's a process. Everything that happens has a cause. And by understanding that process and cause, you know the red flags. And with those red flags, you know how to calculate whether people can pay their debts back and how the dynamic's going to work. And that's why I want to pass it along, because in those 60 pages, people then can learn that. And I'm at a phase in my life where I want to pass along those things that could help other people and ideally help to prevent the next debt crisis, or at least help people navigate it.
Okay, so we're going to get into those 6 stages in just a bit, but I do want to go back to that time around just before the crisis when you were at Bridgewater, and you have this process in place. But what was it? What was that red flag for you? What was really flashing for you at that moment where you realized this was coming?
Well, we had calculated that a number of the entities would not be able to pay back their debt. When there's a certain rate of debt growth that is unsustainable and that there's going to be a problem paying it back, when you do the calculations, you could see that you have a problem. When you start to have a debt problem and you're close to 0 interest rates, that means that the central bank, the Federal Reserve's ability to deal with that won't work. You'll hit 0. And then you enter a new world. Okay, the last time that happened was 1928 to 1929, 30, 31. That's what happened. What happened in 2007 and 9 was the exact same thing. A debt crisis, too much debt, and you hit 0 interest rates and out of luck. And then what happens, there's a classic way of dealing with that, is that the central bank has got to print money and go buy financial assets. And so that's what all the entities did. And so by being able to watch it day by day as to how they went about doing that, allowed us to navigate the crisis so that we could see the rates of deterioration and then the actions taken to end that in much the same way as the Federal Reserve ended it in 1932, 1933, for the same reasons. Now that printing of money and the buying of financial assets causes financial assets to go up in price,
right,
puts money into the economy, and produces the type of reaction that we've now seen in terms of that economy and those markets. Then we're at the stage of the cycle where we are now. And what happens, classically, is that those financial purchases help those who have financial assets more than they help those who don't. And it causes a greater wealth gap. And very classically, that causes populism.
Right.
Because there's a gap between the wealth, and then you move into a situation that's very similar. So being able to see mechanically how that dynamic worked allowed us to navigate it well.
And history does repeat itself. These are patterns that repeat over and over. Now, you did highlight in your book 6 stages of the debt cycle. But if you could zone in on those 6 stages, which stage are we in right now? We have a graphic up right now.
Yeah, so I'll touch on it. The early part of the debt cycle is the great part of the debt cycle because the borrowing of money is being put into assets that are going to be able to pay back that debt and grow, and asset prices go up. Then you enter the bubble stage when everybody is extrapolating that because it happened in the past. Because those assets went up, they're going to continue to go up. And they're going to continue to rise, and it pays to borrow money to do it, but they're not able to actually pay off their cash flow. The top of the cycle usually happens when when the bubble exists and also the Federal Reserve or the central bank begins to tighten money to slow that bubble at the high part of the cycle. So as we take a look at that, we are approaching more the top of that cycle. I don't think we're there yet. I think we're in the 7th inning. When you have that tightening and then you have the turn down, and what I'll call the depression phase, that depression phase happens because you hit 0 interest rates and because they're less effective in monetary policy. That's why 2008 was like it was in much the way 1930 was. And so that's the depression phase. You can then, the central bank has tools. And so, in my opinion, on this long-term debt cycle, we are relatively late in a longer-term debt cycle. We're relatively late in a business cycle. That doesn't mean imminent. I mean, I think there's 2 or 3 more years probably in this. I'm not sure for sure. But we are then going to have a downturn at some point. Downturns always come, recessions always come. And what we have is a situation in which the capacities of the central banks to reverse it are more limited because interest rates are close to 0 or is at 0 in Europe and Japan. And also the effectiveness of monetary policy is largely, quantitative easing is largely behind us because they have put that money in and those asset prices have risen. We also have another issue, which is the wealth gap and the populist issue, because, which is, I think, worse than it was back then. So imagine today, we have the best economy that you probably we're going to get. The unemployment rate is low, the stock market is where it is, asset prices are good. These are times that are good, but we have this polarity. So if I'm looking at 2 or 3 years forward, that's the period that produces greater concern. So I think we're relatively late along in that cycle.
Well, I do want to talk about my generation, the millennials. We were really coming of age during the crisis. So how would you advise us to prepare and I guess, what would you tell our generation? We feel scarred from the crisis.
Yeah. First of all, I think one of the problems is that the experience that you had as the last experience is the one that's going to stick in your mind and probably will not be the one that's going to get you. So that the next experience will be very, very different. I know my parents went through the Great Depression, and then they missed out on the boom because they were always thinking about that. And so I think that what they need to do is see all of those crises. That's why you can see inflationary ones and see all of those, and once you get that perspective, I would say 3 things to your generation, okay? 3 recommendations. The first recommendation is to think about your savings and how much money do you have for savings. And the best way to think about that is to think, how much money do I spend each month and how much money do I have saved so that I can, how many months am I going to be okay without that? And to value savings, right? And calculate it, because savings in that is freedom and security, and think about what that is. So that's the first. How much do I have for that? The second thing is, how do I save well? What should I put my saving in? And when thinking about what you should put your saving in, realize that the least risk investment that you think from volatility is the least risk investment, which is cash, is the worst investment over a period of time. And you could judge that by judging the rate of inflation in relationship to the after-tax income you're going to earn. So if you have an inflation rate that's 2 or 3% and you're earning 1% and you have to pay taxes on that 1% or the 1 or 2% that you're going to get, you're going to get taxed essentially at 2% a year, and that's going to be a problem. So you have to move into assets that are other assets that are going to do better over a period of time. And when you do that, the most important thing I can convey to you is to diversify well, because I can guarantee you that one of those assets, and you won't be able to pick the right one, will be disastrous in your lifetime, that you will lose half of that savings if you're in the wrong one, and you won't know what the right one is. And so pick different countries, pick different asset classes, and I could probably take too long explaining how you might do that. But so that would be the second thing to learn. First thing is think about how to save. Be cautious about debt. When you're thinking about debt, think about, is that debt going to help my savings, or is it going to produce an income? Sometimes debt, like buying a house or buying an apartment or buying an asset, it produces forced savings. Forced savings is a good thing. Or if you're taking on debt and you're thinking, am I going to have that debt in an asset? That asset better produce more income than the cost of your debt. If you're using debt for consumption, that's not a good thing to do. Okay, you're giving up that safety. So number one is think about how much you save and think about whether that should be how you borrow. Number two, make sure that you think about the diversification of that, not in cash. And number three, do the opposite of what your instincts are. If you're going to play the game, it has to be the opposite of what your instincts and the crowd says, because the market reflects the crowd. So you want to buy when no one wants to buy, and you want to sell when no one wants to sell, right? Right. So, and that's emotionally difficult, and probably you're not going to play that game well, because it takes a lot of resources to play the game. We spend hundreds of millions of dollars each year to try to play that game well, and it's a tough game to play well. So I would caution you about the market timing game, but I would say that if you're going to do it in the ways that are uncomfortable, because they're opposite your instincts.
That's really good advice, Ray. One more thing that really resonated with me in the book was if in the next downturn, some of the implications could be the impact on pension obligations, health care. Is my generation going to be on the hook for that?
Yeah. So we pay a lot of attention to debt, and we should, but pension obligations and health care obligations are just like debt. They're obligations that require cash to fund those things. And when you think about that, we don't have enough money to fund those things. And so there'll be a squeeze. And I think that's also part of this political conflict, because when you say to somebody that you're not going to be able to fully fund their pension, or how are you going to fund it, what are you going to take it away from in order to fund it? Or if you think about the health care issues and so on with the demographics, and those require taking things away from people that have been promised to people, or do you print the money? These are issues that will be important for your generation.
And you know, not only are you an incredible money manager, but you're also a really big philanthropist. And when you're talking about the next downturn, you're also bringing up some big social issues, the wealth gap. How do you think about that? How do we address this issue? Because it sounds like it's going to be a very big problem.
Yeah, I think capitalism has got to work for all the people, and democracy's got to work for everybody. And we're in a situation right now, because of a lot of things, that it's not working for a large portion of the bottom 60%. I separated the averages to the bottom 60% and the top 40%. I could have done it the 80% or even 95%. And it's not working for a large percentage of the population. We don't have adequate education. We don't create bottoms. In many cases, my wife works in Connecticut to try to help what are called disengaged and disconnected youth. Let's give you a picture. Connecticut, which is the richest state in the country, or equal to the richest state in the country, has 22% of its high school students are disengaged or disconnected. Disengaged means they attend high school, but they don't really study, they just sort of get through. And disconnected means they don't even know where they are. 22%. Those students, those people are going to be on the street. That's a problem. There are school districts in which they have to share books, or in some cases even have to share pencils. They literally will break a pencil in half and sharpen it from both ends, or pass it around and so on. And that issue about opportunity in terms of education or even income opportunity. There's a population that in that bottom 60% where opiate use is rising and suicides are rising. I think there has to be considered a national emergency in which we create metrics. What are those conditions? And that there should be a dealing with that. I think that these things can be dealt with much, much better, but it has to be treated in a way that that's dealt with. And that has, by making them productive. I don't mean by giving money or by giving welfare, but by doing certain things, probably in private-public partnerships, in which the private sector, that could be business sector, together with the government sector, can do the checks and balances to make those things productive. I see many of these cases. I fund, for example, microfinance. Grameen America is one, but a number of those. And the capacity to lend somebody $1,000 and get paid back, not 99%, 98% payback rates. And that $1,000 can create the purchase of a rug cleaning piece of equipment, and that person's in business to be able to be productive. Those kinds of things need to be thought about, because if we don't have capitalism working for the majority of people, it's going to be threatened. And the same thing is democracy. The democracy is based on the notion of compromise to be able to bring people together and so on. I think if we have too much fragmentation, I think that these are the biggest risks. I think debt crises can be managed, but when you get into bad situations, as a basic principle, if you have rich and poor living together, and they have to decide how they're going to spend a budget, how they divide a pie, and you have an economic downturn, you're probably going to have a conflict. And I think that has to be dealt with.
TechCrunch Disrupt, the annual conference from our sister publication TechCrunch, is underway right now in San Francisco. The three-day event is an opportunity for startups to pitch ideas in front of the world's top investors and entrepreneurs. Lots of good discussion often comes out of TechCrunch Disrupt, and our own Melody Hom is there and got a chance to interview Ray Dalio, co-chief investment officer at Bridgewater, and she joins us now. Hi, Melody.
Hey, Dan. Yeah, it was a really wide-ranging conversation. Ray Dalio, of course, runs the largest hedge fund in the world by assets, based here in Connecticut. When you think about the overall landscape of markets right now, it's so interesting because Ray Dalio basically teased the fact that he may not be operating in the markets for much longer, especially because he's 70 years old and he's trying to think about his own succession plans. I have to say, even though he's a finance guy, he was actually probably the most popular person here in the TechCrunch auditoriums. He did a book signing. It was really hard to even get him to sit down for this interview. I want you to take a look at our conversation. I'm joined by Ray Dalio, the founder, co-CIO, and co-chairman of Bridgewater Associates. Thanks so much for joining us today.
It's a kick to be with you.
Yeah, so we're here at TechCrunch Disrupt, and you are now the face of an app, right? Principles, and it's been getting a lot of heat and traction over the last couple of months. What is the success story behind Principles, and why do you feel like it's been performing well?
To know how to fail well, you know, and to realize it's the path to success, to know that knowing how to deal with one's not knowing is more important than anything one knows. To know how to have an idea meritocracy, and to know how to have fun and go after your dreams and make that happen. And so it's a kick to pass that along.
So it's really interesting. The app itself, you're giving people the opportunity to craft their own principles, right? In addition to following yours, it's almost like, okay, this can be your vision board as well. What would you say is the most creative sorts of principles that you've seen others contribute to the platform?
Well, we're just starting to collect the principles. So But, you know, there's the themes that you see over and over again, and they're true.
Yep.
So I wouldn't make the generalization. I can't imagine the ones that I would say are the most creative, but they're mostly how to get past the challenges, the pains, and all of that. So I would say maybe those.
As you look at your principles personally, what is the most challenging one for you to really hold true to, or you feel as though you face the most obstacles in trying to make sure you're consistently meeting that principle?
Well, I don't know if it's the most valuable one is to meditate. I would say it's not the most challenging, but I want to do it the most because that gives me the equanimity, the creativity that really helps so much. So I would say that would be one of the most important, certainly.
You've rolled out some new tools as well to really help entrepreneurs and leaders. Can you explain the new push here?
Well, I want to pass along all the tools that have been helpful, because tools create habit, they create a framework that allows all these principles to be carried through. I want really an idea meritocracy. That's the most important thing. And so the tools allow that. So I'm passing along first the dot collector. So everybody's going to be available for you able to use the dot collector. I think that'll be terrific. It's our most loved and most impactful tool.
And what would you say is the success story? What is your vision for Principles as you look ahead to a year or two from now? How would you define success?
Well, at every phase in anyone's life, there's a difference in what one defines success. For me, at this stage, my definition for success is to help people be successful without me. In other words, to pass along and to watch.
Memory, yeah.
Well, to watch beauty happen. I feel I'm 70 years old. I don't want any more success myself. I just want to help pass that along, and if I can do that, that'll be success for me, and then I'll go quiet. I'm going to go quiet in about a year and a half, I think.
You know, some core tenets of the concept of Principles and of Bridgewater are really radical transparency, radical open-mindedness. When you look at Silicon Valley, where we are right now, what would you say are the pros or some of the startups and companies out here that are doing that well? Can you name a few leaders that come to mind?
I'm not going to, it's all personal and I keep it private, so I'm not going to name leaders, but I will say that some of the most successful, innovative companies, and then some of the startups that are just getting going, are open-minded and thinking about new and better ways of doing things. So Silicon Valley, I love it because they really resonate the idea of meritocracy, to know one's strengths and one's weaknesses, to work in a community where there's meaningful work and meaningful relationships. It resonates here. So that receptivity is really big here.
And you know, you personally have really taken to social media platforms like Twitter, like LinkedIn, to really be an author, right? In addition to your book, and you're finding avenues to express yourself and engage with customers and people who are interested in your words. Would you say LinkedIn is the best portal?
I want to clarify what I'm doing. Like, I was sort of like hesitant. I'm going to go on social media, and I don't know, and I'm not doing it for most of those reasons. I'm doing it because I'm having quality exchanges with people. You know, every day we're exchanging thoughts on principles, and we're having the back and forth, and the people are really nice and they're very appreciative, and I love communicating with them. So, you know, I like that. We're communicating in very honest ways. But most importantly, it's quality. Like, what are you facing? And to realize that whatever you're facing, there's a principle for it, right? To not view each of these individual things as individual things, but part of that principle. That back and forth exchange has been really well. I'm loving the communication.
I want to briefly touch upon your latest LinkedIn post where you specifically are addressing the administration potentially curbing some of the investments into China and the capital flows there. Would you say that is the optimal scenario? Is that the way that the U.S. government should be going about relations with China?
No, I wouldn't say that. There are four types of wars, right? There's a trade war, there's a capital and currency war, there's a technology war, and then there's a geopolitical war. And I'm seriously concerned about the nature of those wars. So, it has to be done. This exchange of how you accomplish things we shouldn't even be using the term war. We're using it too easily. We should be using the term negotiation, I think. So, the question is, how much will this be a fight in which there's mutually hurting each other? Is this a win-win or a lose-lose? However we can get to a win-win, that's what I would like to see the most of. It's the art of thoughtful disagreement. And how do you create win-wins that I would like to see the most of? So I would say more concerned about conflict than the way that we're having it.
And when you think about that win-win scenario, what does that look like, for the U.S. and China?
Well,
do you see that sort of compromise happening?
I don't think it's just a U.S.-China. I think it's an American thing. In other words, I think when we're dealing with conflict, we're now saying, can we go above it so that we don't make it a lose-lose, so that we know how to get what we each want through exchanges. Like, you tell me what you want and let me see if I can help you get it, and let's do the same so that we build on win-wins. I think we're having the same challenges domestically. There's a wealth gap, and there's an opportunity gap, and then there's a conflict between increasingly extremes and a fight that can become a really dangerous fight and produce a lose-lose. So I think the issue is to go above, if we can go above it, and we say, how do we get the best collective benefit, and work on that. That's now lots of ways we can do that, but that is, I think, the most important thing. Because if you look about what we can have, there is enough, okay? There is enough of everything, and there's an innovativeness, and there's a capability. But so often, there's been these lose-loses that can then be very damaging. So I'm concerned about that. So like the wealth gap, like the opportunity gap, the idea of coming together and working it together and understanding the art of thoughtful disagreement. Principles, go back to principles. What are the principles that bind us together? Are we clear on those? What are the principles that separate us? So I think we have to think about how we do this in a together way before we really damage ourselves, because it can get so extreme that it can be damaging.
And on that point, when you think about unity within America, of course, there seems to be a lot of divide within the U.S. political system when you think about the impeachment inquiry that Nancy Pelosi did start on President Trump. Do you feel like that will be a headwind for the markets as you think about the next couple of months?
I read history, and I find the same things happen over and over again. And what I see is that there is a political system that normally has an ability to debate things and get past that. And I'm worrying that this is a war in which the damaging and the hurt of that war can be so great that it undermines the effectiveness of the system. History has shown that. If you look at the late 30s, for example, the polarity between the haves and the have-nots, the wealth gap was analogous, the opportunity gap was analogous, and the ability to get past that. So I'm more concerned about that. I think there are three big forces that are at work. That's the domestic economic gap and political gap, which is becoming extreme, and I worry about a downturn in which, number two, monetary policy won't be as effective in the next downturn. If we're at each other's throats now, and then you have a downturn, and it's going to be worse.
Yep.
And then we have the conflict in terms of the rising, China as a rising country, with the United States as an established country. And so to work oneself through that in the right ways with wisdom, to understand the art of thoughtful disagreement and get at the right aggregate rather than an everyone lose situation. That's what, so that's what worries me.
Hopefully we can achieve that soon. Thank you so much,
Hopefully we
Ray,
can
for
achieve
joining
it soon.
us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
That was Ray Dalio, the founder of Bridgewater Associates. Dan, it was a really interesting conversation, as you could glean, and the art of thoughtful disagreement came up at least twice during that conversation, if only our political system, and when you think about global relations, if that were actually a core tenet of discussions. I think he did lay out some interesting headwinds ahead, although he wasn't necessarily taking on a fearful approach, but that's what happens when you're sitting on a lot of assets, I suppose.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. Thanks so much, Melody. That is Melody Hom of Yahoo Finance.